Hello and welcome to financialexpress.com. We are having a pre-budget discussion here with the interim budget just a short while away. We want to know what the country is thinking, what our leaders are thinking, and what the experts are thinking about in this interim budget. I have with me an elite panel from Deloitte India. I've got Dr. Rumki Majumdar, who looks at economy. She is director at Deloitte India. We have Pravin Govindu, who looks at consumer affairs. We have Debashish Biswas, who is a partner with Deloitte India, and he will be covering infrastructure for us. And then there's Mr. M.S. Money, partner with Deloitte India, who will talk to us about indirect taxes and what we can expect there. And of course, Sumit Singhania, who will talk to us about the direct tax front and whether we can expect something on that side as well in the interim budget. Now, at Financial Express this year, we are running with the team Mobilizing Bharat. And when I say Mobilizing Bharat, it's because we are in an election year, and I'm expecting the government to roll out quite a few SOPs for the grassroots level. Taking the entire country ahead. We've been seeing growth year after year. But this year, what can we expect? I think let's start with an outlook on the economy and what announcements we are likely to see in the interim budget. So over to you, Rumki, if you could just give us a quick brief on what to expect.
Right. Thank you, Roshan. And I think the economy is looking really good. We are probably going to clock 7.3%, 7.23% growth, and this will be like 2 times in a row that we have grown at over 7%, and especially at a time when a global economy is barely growing or has been very modest. This year is likely to be modest as well, but there will be geopolitical uncertainties that will be on outlook. That said, I think the domestic demand is on a stronger footing. We have seen investments, DCF, gross capital formation, holding up the growth most, and private consumption will also pick up, especially in the rural economy where we are seeing some signs of green shoot. Now, coming to the budget, this being an interim budget, we are not expecting any big bang announcements. And this was hinted by our finance minister as well last month in the World Economic Policy Forum. That said, I think there will be some key messaging done. One will be around the fiscal deficit. And I think the government will kind of give out a message saying that they are adhering to fiscal consolidation. And that is important because they want to give out a message to the investors that they have control over their finances. And adhering, we believe the fiscal deficit will likely be around 5.9% this year. And given the prudence the government has shown in spending over the last few years, I think it will probably be able to meet the target of 4.5% of GDP by 4.5% in the next 2 years.
Next 2 years, okay.
Next 2 years, right? And this is important because it will keep the sovereign yields steady, which is very needed for financial stability, and also it will crowd in private investment. And then we are expecting private capex to pick up by the end of this year. Second will be around inflation. Thankfully, the core prices have started declining since mid of last year, and it is below the Fed's target rate. Is the food inflation, which has jumped back up again, unfortunately, because of unseasonal rains impacting agricultural output. But that said, the government will probably ensure the supply side of key food products are managed well and inventories are taken care of so that the food prices do not translate into broad-based inflation. The third impact will be on supporting the rural demand. And that is something, as I was mentioned, that there are some green shoots being visible and that the government will ensure through price support, through ensuring some jobs in the construction. So keeping the infrastructure spending pedal going on. So that will help in improving the job situation in the rural economy. All these will be the key focus going for in this interim budget. Long-term budget announcement will probably be delayed for the July announcement.
July, yeah. In fact, you touched upon infrastructure, so I'll just take that to Debashish. So infrastructure is something we've been seeing in the last 3-4 years, a boom. And, with the number of projects being inaugurated, new highways, new tunnels, new bridges, airports, seaports, a lot of things are being built in the last few years. What do you expect from on the infrastructure side this year as well?
Thanks, Roshan. I believe that that will continue. As you correctly mentioned that year on year there is a 33% increase in the budget for infrastructure, and the country needs that, and we have the money as well, so that's the good part. To sustain the growth which Rumki mentioned, that 7% year on year growth, infrastructure is a big enabler, and it is going to continue. That's my belief. And I believe that be it in the interim budget, they might touch upon, but definitely post that there will be a conscious effort to increase the investments in the digital infrastructure as well. Like we talk about the physical infrastructure, that's a absolute necessity for Bharat, and as you mentioned, be it urban or rural, in both parts, be it roads, bridges, the water supply lines, the Swachh Bharat mission or the cleanliness part of it, but also creating digital public goods. There will be, I think, investment therein, because that's the need of the hour as well, and that touches upon multiple layers across both rural and urban.
What about on the green energy side? Because I think there's been a lot of talk about the government investing in more green energy projects as well. What about that?
So, of course, we are seeing that some of the PSUs have started investing, like ethanol plants, etc. That's one bit, but we are also seeing private sector. See, sustainability is going to be a big deal, and sustainable infrastructure, as well as I'm just adding to it resilient infrastructure. So, protection against flood or any kind of, like that resiliency in the city level as well as the rural infrastructure level. We will see that. I'm hoping that there'll be certain announcements to start with in the interim budget, because and also certain policy pushes on that, because we are a little bit, we need to do on the policy front and the process front first, and that will enable in infrastructure, green infrastructure, like right, solar we have seen penetrate well, but EVs we will see it more, as well as like things like hydrogen, etc. The research part of it also we will see.
So you expect some kind of announcement in the budget, some outlay for that?
Yes. Of course, because that's in line with what was there last year as well, and also some of the projects that we are seeing, while it was not in the budget, but when government actually comes from budget to the project level, we are seeing that component added. Two parts: one is inclusive infrastructure, which means that the infrastructure for all. That's one common thing that we are seeing, and the other bit is basically the sustainability resiliency part of it.
Okay, right. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that everybody looks forward to in the budget announcements is what are the changes in the tax structure. So first, let's look at the the indirect taxes side, which is the government's bread and butter, where some way or the other they're taking it out from our pocket, both sides, direct as well as indirect. But on the indirect taxes side, what kind of would there be any kind of SOPs, any kind of relief offered, or do you think there would be additional cesses levied again this year? Mr. Money, if I have to come to you on that.
So I don't think there will be any SOPs or any additional levies, because it's in the nature of an interim budget. We just have to bear in mind that the role of indirect taxes in the budget over a period of time has come down significantly after the introduction of GST. Because most of the GST related changes and issues are taken care of in the GST council meetings. And which again, I mean, there need to be at least 4 GST council meetings in a year. So in a sense, when it comes to indirect taxes, we have something like 4 mini budgets, in a year on an ongoing basis. When it comes to the union budget, there are 2 expectations, that we have broadly. One, in respect of GST, possibly there will be some kind of directional clarity provided. Because GST has completed 6 years.
Yes.
And by the time the final budget after the elections is presented in July, GST will be in the 7th year. So GST in the 7th year is the right stage for launching the second generation reforms in GST. For instance, inclusion of petroleum products in GST,
right,
which has been, on the anvil for some time, but has not happened due to various reasons. Similarly, what happens to electricity duty? What happens to stamp duties that are levied on real estate? So possibly the budget will not be able to decide on these issues because that requires the concurrence of all the states also as part of GST Council. But if there can be some kind of a directional clarity in the budget given to indicate that the government is mindful of the fact that we have to now move with the next stage of reform. The fact that collections in GST have been very, very upbeat should not be reason for us to pause the reform on GST because a lot of reform is even now required. So in
Right.
terms of directional clarity, if the budget is able to suggest a few things in terms of what the government is thinking on GST, that would be great for everyone.
Okay.
From a customs perspective, the budget continues to make changes in customs, and there are quite a few customs changes that have happened in the earlier budgets also. Since this is an interim budget, possibly we will not be seeing too many tariff-related changes.
Okay.
We will not see too much of a tinkering with the rates. But in terms of the customs processes, we could see some changes which have been discussed for quite some period of time. For instance, how do we make the customs litigation process paperless? So today,
Okay.
when there is a customs litigation process, the documents have to be submitted physically. Everything has to be signed physically. You cannot use a digital signature certificate. The orders are issued physically and the response has to go physically. So it's all manual work. Whereas in respect of many of the other tax laws, we have already moved to paperless, where
Full
everything can be
digital.
filed
Yeah.
digitally.
Mm.
So can we also move to digital customs filing for everything in respect of the customs litigation?
Right. Right.
Equally, unlike the GST or the erstwhile service tax, we have not had an amnesty scheme in customs since a very long period of time. So possibly this is the right time because there is significant amount of litigation that is pending in various courts and tribunals relating to customs matters. One way to unclog that burden on all the tribunals and courts would be to have some kind of an amnesty scheme where, similar to the past, a certain proportion of the tax is paid and the penalties and interest can possibly be waived off in full or in part. But a
Okay.
customs amnesty scheme will really, really help in overcoming many difficult issues that have occurred in the past. There is one specific expectation that some of the businesses have in respect of customs. See, in the union budget of 2023, there was an amendment made to the Customs Act in terms of Section 65A.
Okay.
This section related to inbound manufacture, which means you have a custom bonded warehouse and you do the manufacturing inside the warehouse, largely to export the product outside. This was a very good system, which is known as the mover system, which was introduced in customs a few years back. Typically, when you manufacture something in a custom bonded warehouse, which means it is under the customs department's control, no taxes are applicable.
Right.
On the input side and on the output side. Now, in 2023 Union Budget, a new section called Section 65A got notified, which said that the IGST and the compensation cess are required to be paid in case of imports. However, these are creditable. Fortunately for us, this section has not been notified till now. It was announced in the budget, but subsequently, I think some wisdom has prevailed, and therefore it has not been notified till now. So if the current interim budget decides to dispense with the amendment to Section 65A, I think businesses would be relieved to a very large extent.
Right. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Sumit, I know you're in a bit of a rush, so let's quickly get your take on any changes expected on the direct tax front. And also if you could touch upon, personal tax a little bit. That's
Sure,
something that
thanks.
everybody would be interested in.
Thanks, Roshan. Sorry for that. Got to drop off at 12:30. But Mani talked very eloquently about what we can expect from the budget, right? Just from a tax perspective. But if I speak of the direct taxes, I would put a theme of continuity of the tax policy as a front theme in the budget, because one, it's an interim budget. The other is, in some way, it's also precursor to the main budget that will eventually happen during the year, right? So if you really look back a bit, currently the tax policy that we have, especially speaking of direct tax policy, we are one of the highly progressive tax policy country at the moment, right? Every year we're making changes, tweaks to make sure the tax laws aligns with the business reality. We are not living in a static tax environment. And that's very, very highly positive for the business. We have, in fact, one of the lowest tax rates in AP, Asia Pacific. I would even, in fact, go out and say even globally, right? So for a manufacturing company, the headline tax rate is 15%. If you add all the surcharge and cess, it comes down to 17%, which still is highly, highly competitive as compared to some of our competitive markets, let's say in even Asia Pacific and globally. What is important really here, Roshan, I would say, is to continue that framework for a longer period. And the reason I say this because the 17% tax break has actually been helpful in catalyzing a large amount of the investment in the manufacturing sector, which has been a laggard for a number of years, just in last decade.
In fact, I think that was a focus of the government, with the PLI schemes as well.
Exactly. So it stitches, the story stitches together, right? So you have a PLI scheme on one side, you have a lower tax rate on one side. What is important is that the sunset doesn't happen just yet, because the current tax law says the company has to start manufacturing before 31st March 2024, which is right here, right? There is a need, and I would think widely expected also, that budget will just roll this over to another 2 or at least 4 years, if not longer, right? So that's one big change I would expect. The other change I would expect is what Debashish said. Significant amount of the infrastructure spend is still to be allocated to large development of the infrastructure assets, etc. To catalyze private investment, I would think it's important that long-term financing is encouraged, right? And to get that, it is also important, therefore, that the tax cost for the long-term financing is very competitive. We have had for the longest period, about 10, 11 years, very high, very low rate for debt financing, which was close to 5%, right? Add some surcharge and cess lands to 5.5%. But that has been again sort of done away with from June 2023. I would make a case for that to be reinstated all over again. If not 5%, looking at the financials and the budget estimates for the revenue for the government, maybe look at a slightly higher but yet moderate rate, maybe 7.5%, something like that. Because currently, if you look at it, the debt financing tax cost is as high as 20% under domestic tax law. Some of the foreign investors can still get the benefit under the double tax treaty, which is bilateral treaties. But that really goes into number of ifs and buts, conditionalities, and so on and so forth. What will help the government to catalyze this large scale investment that government is looking for infrastructure is to actually have a singular rate in the domestic tax law saying all the long-term debt financing, and there could be eligibility criteria around it, should be subject to tax, let's say 7.5%. Something which is definitely more incentivized than a routine taxation or routine financing transactions. Those are two big asks I would have, Roshan. Third, if you ask me, probably I'll be leaving. So before you ask me second question, let me answer that. Third, I would think structurally, if I look at it, there is a capital gains tax structure that needs a bit of tweaking around and sort of rationalization. We have multiple tax rates. You would know, even as an individual, you have long-term, short-term, the way we compute long-term capital gains and short-term, the way a corporate taxpayer computes, the way a non-resident corporate taxpayer computes is very different from our domestic.
And now we have the TDS also, which has increased.
Right, and if you look at the FPI and the FII taxpayer, they have their own tax regime. So I think there is a need now to come to a plan to say, look, all these tax rates made sense in last 20, 30 years when different investors had different incentives and different way of investing. Now that playing field has been leveled up, if you honestly ask me, right? How you invest and how corporate invest is practically similarly driven from an incentive perspective, practically similarly driven from a business perspective. So there is a need to rationalize the overall corporate tax, capital gains tax rate structure, have a fewer tax slabs or tax rates, have a more uniform way of computing taxes, right? How a short-term gains should be classified in the hand of individual versus a corporate, in a slump sale versus a demerger, mergers, sale of share. I think fewer rules and lower rate is what I would think is the need of the hour for us to rationalize the corporate tax, capital gains tax structure. So those are the three broad themes, if I could just sort of lay out for the pre-budget.
Right. Thanks, Sumit. I can let you go. And Pravin, I'd like to come to you. I mean, very interesting areas we've been seeing in the last couple of years, talking about AI and all of that. You think, there would be something on the tech side, whether we would have some incentives, especially given that the government needs to also look at probably regulating AI in the long term, and anything on the consumer side otherwise.
Yeah. So tech I think there's a huge scope. There's actually an opportunity for India in some sense, right? In terms of how can we leverage tech and all the developments that are happening in tech. Right? India is probably is close to 350 to 400 billion dollar of export of services that happens out of India. A lot of this is driven by tech. This is also predicted to go almost grow to about $1 trillion by about 2028, 2030. And a huge amount of that is going to be driven by tech. So from my perspective, it's a huge opportunity for government to boost. Obviously, one is the digital infrastructure to support all of this. How can we also accelerate, let's say, or give certain specific incentives for innovation led by AI, right? There are a lot of startups, there are a lot of companies, even large corporates who are looking at investing in AI. And how can government look at incentivizing some of those? While regulating AI is one aspect of it, but is there a way to also incentivize tech-driven AI tools? Because it's not just tech and AI will also solve the problem of, let's say, reducing wastage, improving it. It is applicable across multiple sectors, right? Whether it is agriculture, whether it is textiles, we're now talking about climate. Across sectors, it is applicable. So how can we, and given that there's a lot of know-how, there are resources that are there in the country, how can then government kind of crystallize or consolidate or create some kind of a platform which can enable growth using tech and AI, right? So that's the point of view. So anything to do with incentives, anything to do with subsidies, infrastructure to create such AI innovation labs, all of that would go a long way in tapping this opportunity.
Okay, and you expect something like that in this interim budget itself, that they will probably touch upon it, because it's
I
right
would
here.
think so. While it is interim, see, it's also a fast developing opportunity, right? So while it is interim, I think it will be good to continue some of the focus and continue to invest in areas which are related to technology. Even ONDC, for that matter, is one of the other things, right? A large platform trying to democratize the way commerce is happening in the country. So there are some of these large programs which are already underway. I would expect the government to continue to put focus, or probably even increase focus, in some of those areas which have a large tech linkage.
Right. Okay. So coming back to you, Rumki, general elections around the corner. So while the interim budget may not be that hard hitting, in the complete budget, which we'll probably see in June, July, do you expect some more severe measures, especially when it comes to the economy? Because globally, the cues are very mixed right now. You still have a couple of wars going on. Crude oil prices have been fluctuating quite a bit, and India has been taking quite a bit of the shock in crude oil. We have an arrangement with Russia, whether we'll extend that. So what's your take on that?
So, Roshan, what I believe is that the government will probably focus on 5 aspects. And this government being, if you look at past budget, it is always focused on long-term goals. So these 5 goals that they will try to communicate in the full budget. One would be on infrastructure, be it physical and social. So physical infrastructure, they will probably be calibrating the spend on physical infrastructure depending on how much private investment that is coming in. But we'll continue the momentum, because India needs world-class infrastructure to bring down logistics cost, and that's what the government will emphasize on. Following which, they will probably the social sector, so basically spending on health and education. And we have seen in the past budget, the government has emphasized on that because that is needed for building human capabilities in India. Because as Pravin was saying, with technology coming in, the workplace is going to be very different. The jobs will be very different, and we have demographic advantage, but they need to be trained for the kind of jobs that is coming to us. So that's why we need to build the workforce for the future, and that's why investment in skills, investment in proper education, and also in health will be very important. The third will be the emphasis on manufacturing and also high-end manufacturing, and we have seen the share of high-end manufacturing going up, be it semiconductors, electricals, and their exports have gone up. So this will help India to move up the value chain, global value chain. The fourth emphasis will be on renewables, which also has been touched upon, and the fact that India has committed to net zero, and also and there are interim milestones that they have to meet. So they have doubled down on the effort of the last 8 years. If you see, the renewable capacity has been increased by almost 300 or 400 times. So the government has already doubled down in its effort to build the capacity now, but it has to do more, and the government will continue doing so. And the fifth will be digitization, because the fact that India had quite a bit of success in thinking out of the box solutions for which and all of the digital public infrastructure that the government has floated, and they have led to better formalization, inclusiveness, and also efficiency in the economy. So that is something which the government will make an effort to improve on and build, and we will look forward to reforms and initiatives in these 5 areas. Yeah.
Right. Debashish, specifically on the infrastructure side, on railways, in the last year or so, we've seen so many Vande Bharat trains being launched, a lot of emphasis on expanding the rail network, as well as we've had some issues with safety. We had one of the worst disasters, in railway safety. Yeah. So anything that you expect that the government would probably do, especially in rail infrastructure?
So I think more high-speed railways, be it the bullet trains of the world, as well as the Vande Bharats, that might come in the interim budget as well as the next one. Safety, already railway is working. I think more investments will come in. Railway budget, we will see a higher spend on railways from the safety angle. Because Rumki talked about logistics costs, and we know that roads, of course, is there, but railways is a big sort of a medium for supply chain. So that way, also we will see investments in the inland waterways as well. Already we are seeing that there are large projects which have been conceived, but we will see these infrastructure will develop more along with the conventional ones, which is roads, airways, railways. But inland waterways is also something government has started focusing. And lastly, the multimodal part of it, Gati Shakti is a project which talks about the multimodal, because it's the interchange. We'll see a lot of physical as well as digital interventions there in that way.
Right. Mr. Mani, if I'd come to you, there's been a lot of talk in the last year of global car manufacturer, electric vehicle manufacturer coming into India and demanding, SOPs for being able to set up a plant here, while domestic manufacturers have been saying like, hey, just level the playing field for us. So far, nothing has really moved forward on that. We've been hearing a lot of talk on it. You expect something in the budget?
Difficult to say that, but I would say largely the focus of the government has been to have more and more of local manufacturing. And most of the PLI schemes and the Atmanirbhar Bharat policy overall is focused towards ensuring that we have more and more of import substitution over a period of time. Now, the import substitution is not an end in itself.
Okay.
Because at some point of time, if we focus on import substitution as an end in itself, we will be left behind in terms of the technology that we need. Because we need the technology. We certainly need, various kinds of cars, including EVs and including everything else. So what we have seen in the previous budgets, which is expected to continue even now, is that from a policy perspective, the focus will be let's import the parts and let's assemble the product in India.
Right.
And over a period of time, let's also build domestic manufacturing for those parts. So the
Right.
initial objective is import substitution of the final product. If that can be achieved together with import substitution of the components and parts, great. But in many products, it's not possible because of the lead time required to set up the manufacturing or the
Yeah.
technology involved or the patents involved, etc.
Yeah.
In those cases, import the parts, make it better for Indian manufacturing, make it easier for them to import the parts,
Yeah.
do the assembly, do the sale, and set up the manufacturing of those parts also over a period of time. This has been
Right.
a very good plan that we have seen unraveling with the PLI scheme. I mentioned mover a little back, even in respect of mover. So this has been the thrust, and we expect this to continue in the interim budget and subsequently in the final budget also.
Right. Okay. And I'll just come to Pravin for one last take on this. The last couple of years, we've had a lot of issues with accessing semiconductors, and which led the government to incentivize semiconductor manufacturing in India, which we hoped would lead to a reduction in prices, and we could become as competitive as China, in at least in electronics. You see that happening?
Sorry, could you repeat that? See what happening in terms of continuing with some of those
Yeah, the
incentives?
incentives, yes.
Okay. See, again, like Mani was saying, right, difficult to say. These are heavily capital intensive sectors. But having said that, I think somewhere, given the fact that we are also overly dependent on some of the other countries for some of these crucial, critical parts, my thinking is probably they would continue to incentivize this sector. One, to improve self-sufficiency. Two, it also generates quite a few jobs and employment. And I think somewhere three, it also gets linked to your other question on tech, right? Given that
Yeah.
there is so much of automation, AI, and tech that's happening, and given that these are also related, from a value chain standpoint, there are probably also synergies that can be drawn upon if we have a larger play in the value chain. So from that perspective, also there is incentive for the government to continue some of those incentives from an investment standpoint. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, it be a ideally, yes, it could be a good opportunity for the government to consider that.
Great. Okay. So we will again catch up on the 1st of February, right after Nirmala Sitharaman's speech, and see how much from this wish list and how much of the expectations we've had have been met, and in which direction the budget goes. So, like I said, our team at Financial Express has been mobilizing Bharat. Let's see if the budget actually caters to that. And I'd like to thank you all so much for joining me today for this quick pre-budget take. And I'd like you to join me again on the 1st for decoding of the budget. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roshan. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.